Hi, my name's Phil Boas. I'm the Director of Design and Learning Methods at Mount Eliza Executive Education, part of Melbourne Business School. Topic today is teams, executive teams, management teams, project teams. Why teams? I mean, during the 1980s, teams were boring, done to death, and they didn't get any better. We had workshops from end to end. We didn't get a lot of great teams from them. So we have started to ask the question, why don't we get senior executives, managers into our workshops? We advertise for a workshop for teams, and there's a dead silence. And I just find this absolutely amazing. I mean, I go into organisations and I see them doing their technical thing and their professional thing and their relational thing incompetent, frightening. And when you say you sit in a room full of people having a thing called a meeting or a team meeting, and you look at what goes on and your heart stops and you think, oh, this is like a toxic waste dump. But they don't come to a program you put on that would help them actually enhance that. And you think to yourself, there's something missing in here. And you look at what's going on out there and you ask yourself, what are you not paying attention to? And I actually don't know the answer to that, but I have a guess. I think that senior executives have spent a lot of time, and managers and project managers, a lot of time learning their trade. They learned how to manage projects technically. They're engineers, or they're finance people, or they're IT people. Whatever it is, they learnt their technical, professional, competent behaviour. And now, 20, 30 years on, when most of their working life is actually manipulating people to get things done and sitting around in groups of people, never occurs to them that there's a whole set of skills they could be understanding and acquiring to make this thing work better. They just don't seem to get it. So I could be wrong about this, but I've sat with a lot of executive teams in the last 10 years, and I haven't seen a lot of really high quality behaviour. The reason I get to sit with them is because even they know their behaviour is not high quality. Without high quality behaviour, they can't make good decisions. They can't even solve the problems that would allow them to make good decisions. So meetings are repetitive. You sit in an exec team one month and you hear the same trash the next one and the next one. And I've asked myself, why doesn't this bother them? Well, it does, of course, but after a while they simply become inured to sitting around this room being bullied or harassed or playing nasty games with each other. Political games, power games, stuff. So, if I'm going to talk to you about teams, what I'm going to talk to you about is the whole field in which team behaviour lives. This is about relationships. It is also about emotional intelligence. It's about group dynamics. It's about what actually happens when groups of people sit together. Now, some of the more interesting things, back in the 50s, a psychologist by the name of Solomon Asch conducted a series of experiments. They were just so simple. He just put 3 lines up on a screen and he sat a whole lot of people in a room like this and one experimental subject who didn't know that all the rest were plants. And he put A, B and C lines up there, and one line was shorter than the others. And then he went around the room saying, are these lines the same size? And he checked with his plants, and by the time he got to the live subject, who could see the damn line was shorter, listening to everyone say, no, it's the same length. Finally, the live subject would go, same length. And in no time at all, if he didn't do it the first time, by the third or fourth one, he was conditioned. He did what the group said. He had learnt to be influenced by the group. And he didn't know that was happening to him. But then there was a little twist on this experiment. When he did the next batch, he put in the room with all his plants one person who was going to side with the subject. And now what happened? As soon as the subject heard one person agree with him, he was willing and able to hold his position. So we learned something really interesting about how teams work. All you have to have is one ally. If you can set up an arrangement in a group so that there are some allies, people can actually behave with more integrity. They can actually hold their opinion. Now back in about, 1906, Sir Francis Galton, who was a psychophysicist, and he was in his 80s at this stage, lived in Plymouth, and he went out to a country stock and poultry fair. And there were thousands of people in this local fair, and he went to the fair and came across a little stall with a guy selling tickets to guess what was the weight of the slaughtered ox standing in front of them. When it had been slaughtered and cut up, what would the weight be of the meat that was there for sale? And for sixpence, you got a numbered sheet and you could put your thumbprint on it, write what your score was. At the end, when the beast was slaughtered and weighed, the closest to the right answer would get a prize. There were 800 people guessed the weight of this beef. At the end of the exercise, Sir Francis Galton persuaded the guy to give him the tags. 6 of them were illiterate. Of the rest, he did all his psychometrics on them, and he found what was the mean weight. Now, I can't remember, it was something like 1,779 pounds, I think, was the weight of the beast when it was slaughtered. No one got that. Someone got within 1 pound. Most of the rest was spread all over the place. But when he added up the entire group and did the mean, it came to exactly the weight of the slaughtered beef. Now that little piece of information has allowed us to find sunken atomic submarines and all sorts of other fascinating organisational problems. See, it turns out a guy by the name of Surowiecki, who's studied crowds and the behaviour of groups of various sorts, has been able to identify that collections of people, the right collections of people put together collectively, make the best decisions. Of course, you would have to know which of all those people, if any, was the one person who could make it. It's probably not your CEO. So there are real implications about what happens in a team meeting, in a boardroom, in an executive team, a project team, when you're trying to build and manage the relationships. A guy by the name of Irving Janis created a concept which he called groupthink. And he studied some fiascos in the Kennedy era, like the Bay of Pigs fiasco, for example. What he found was that when you put a collection of people together, they are prone, like the live subject in those early experiments of ashes, they are prone to want to stay cohesive with the group. So a kind of toxic cohesion is formed, where people attempt to stay a part of the team by not disturbing the status quo. Now, that might be nice for alignment, one of our favourite jargon words for dyslexic teams. It's fine for cohesion, but the price of this cohesion is that aberrant views, different views, possibly more accurate views or alternative valuable realities are lost. Because what Janice showed was that people were inclined to stay bound to the power of the group in a variety of quite interesting ways. So there turns out to be in social psychology a whole range of studies and understandings and awarenesses that are useful in the boardroom, in an executive team, in a project team, in a management team. But they aren't known. People don't learn them, and how to make use of them in those settings is not something that people seem particularly enthusiastic to find out. So, when we look at teams and ask ourselves, what do we need to do? What is a good team? What is a high-performing team? We find some interesting things. The first is, a high-performing team can have extensive conflict. In fact, alternate positions are encouraged. What happens is that in a high-performing team, people argue vehemently for their position, but they don't do emotionally destructive stuff. And at the end of a meeting where you've had a lot of conflict, which is what you want to solve problems and reach good decisions, they'll walk away together happily, positively. They won't go and talk behind each other's backs. They won't backstab and do destructive conversation. So a high-quality team has conflict and uses it constructively. You sit in a meeting and you don't hear a lot of diverse opinion, do not think you've got a good team, you've got a damaged team. You've got a team that is functioning badly, probably under control of an autocratic CEO or team leader. Because if you have a burning need to have control of everything, then you can't afford to have opinions that are not the same as yours. And if you want the best outcome from a collection of people sitting together, if there is any point in their sitting together, then it's best that what you do is find out what the different people sitting in your team actually believe. What they do, what they know, different to what you know, what their judgment is, different to yours. Because otherwise there's no point in having them sitting there. If they're all going to say exactly what you want, then why bother having them sitting there in the first place? Now it's interesting, when we've had jobs with leadership groups and senior teams, one of the things we've found is that there are a set of qualities that are necessary in order to make it work. Firstly, it's not safe to sit in a team where you can be backstabbed. You've got to have some rules of engagement that contain the relationship of the team. And those rules of engagement have got to work. Now, in our society, you can legislate for things, you can let market forces take control of things, or you can have social contracts. We all know that social contracts work best. That's why, at some point in your life, you're probably going to stand up there with some very official person beside you, and Mr. and Miss Wonderful, in front of all their friends, are going to say, "I do." They may mean for the moment, but they say, "I do." And that's a social contract they formed in front of their peers and their parents and their friends. That's a social contract. It wasn't legislated, wasn't market forces, like how they got together might have been a market force-driven thing. But it's a social contract, which now has the binding status that, if it's broken, everybody heard you commit yourself to that. So you are then, you know inside your head that you will be seen as dishonest. You will be seen as not someone who honours their agreements, even amongst their family and friends. A pretty bad experience. So a social contract is the most powerful form of contract to have in your team. So one of the things that good teams do is they build social contracts. They work together to figure out what are the rules that make sense. And there are some basic rules. Some have come out of studies done at Harvard over a number of years with their students, some out of other experiences we've had. Do no harm is a big one, and that means really do no harm. Tell me first is a big one. That means if you've got a problem with her, tell her. Don't tell me. If you come to me and I'm part of this contract, I will say to you, hey, the contract is you deal with her. If you think that she's too frightening, hey, I'll go with you and we can have that conversation together. But I'm not going to talk to you about your problems with her. Don't do stuff behind the back. Get rid of the conversations in the corridor. Don't do scapegoating. Don't play blame games. And agree to the confidentiality of personal information. This is a hard one because there are a lot of people sitting in your team who might want your job, and stabbing you in the back might turn out to be very profitable for them. Not going to make this a high quality team. Likewise, you want teams to work. What this means is that every person sitting in this room should be able to ask for help of every other person in the room and know they'll get the help, they'll get it without conditions, they'll get it when they ask, and it will be genuine. And every person in the room knows I can ask for help from anyone here, and I will give help if I'm asked, to everyone sitting here. So we've learned a lot of things about how to take care of one another in groups. We've learnt there are some ways to make teams work. There are some ways to screw them up. We know how to do both. I'm still surprised endlessly by the fact that for nearly 70 years we have been building knowledge about how cohesive, effective teams actually function. And although we've been building that knowledge, although the knowledge is there, we still do not get much take-up from organisations to acquire that knowledge. And that knowledge would allow organisations to operate more effectively, more profitably, more successfully. So one of the questions that we sit with is the question, what would it take for an organisation to see that a whole lot of the people moving up into senior positions are going to spend more and more time influencing people, more and more time sitting in collections of people together? Doesn't someone see that there are skills and knowledge and abilities they could acquire so that the teams of the future will be more successful than the teams of the past? Now let me make one final distinction of some importance. When you sit around these rooms and you have a meeting, is that a team? Well, in a rational world, a meeting is a thing that's run by rules of engagement. In America, it's Robert's Rules of Meetings. In Australia and most of the Western world, most of the other parts of the world, it's things like Josky or Renton, books full of rules for, like, watch Parliament. You want to see how wonderful this is as an entity. If you run meetings by rules, you've got delegates and representatives, there are no people present. If you run a group, you've got relationships. You've got history. There are people present. So a meeting, let me make a distinction. It's sort of like ringing, if you've got a meeting where there are delegates and representatives, this is like ringing up your partner and saying, hello love, look, I won't be home tonight, I'm sending a representative, look after them and I'll see you tomorrow. I don't think so. But that's what a meeting is. Collection of delegates and representatives. They don't have a relationship with you. There's nothing personal or There's no history. It could be a different face every time. You have to think of a team as a different animal. A team is a collection of people who've built a history. When someone's missing, the next time they come back, that history is shared with them. They're pulled back into the common knowledge frame so they can work together. So there's commitment. And there's not a lack of trust, which is the most common pattern that you find in teams that are having trouble working. So you want to build a trust. You want people to have conflict. You want people to be committed. You want to be able to get help when you need it and ask for it and know you'll get it. You want a high-performing team. You've got to build the skill set to have it. Thank you.